The 4 steps we are announcing today are the result of a detailed and thorough collaboration between FHFA, the U.S. Treasury, and the Federal Reserve. We examined all options available and determined that this comprehensive and complementary set of actions best meets our 3 objectives of market stability, mortgage availability, and taxpayer protection. Throughout this process, we've been in close communications with the GSEs themselves. I have also consulted with members of Congress from both parties, and I appreciate their support as FHFA, the Federal Reserve, and Treasury have moved to address this difficult issue. Before I turn to Jim Lockhart to discuss action he is taking today, let me make clear that these 2 institutions are unique. They operate solely in the mortgage market and are therefore more exposed than other financial institutions to the housing correction. Their statutory capital requirements are thin and poorly defined as compared to other institutions. Nothing about our actions today in any way reflects a changed view of the housing correction or the strength of other U.S. financial institutions. Jim.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac share the critical mission of providing stability and liquidity to the housing market. Between them, the enterprises have $5.4 trillion of guaranteed mortgage-backed securities, we call that MBS, and debt outstanding, which is equal to the publicly held debt of the United States. Their market share on all new mortgages reached 80% earlier this year, but is now falling. During the turmoil over the last year, they played a very important role in providing liquidity to the conforming mortgage market. That has required a very careful and delicate balance of mission and safety and soundness. A key component of this balance has been the ability to raise and maintain capital. Given recent market conditions, that balance has been lost. Unfortunately, as housing prices, earnings, and capital have continued to fall, their ability to fulfill their mission has deteriorated. In particular, the capacity of their capital to absorb further losses while supporting new business activity is now in doubt. Today's action addresses safety and soundness concerns. FHFA rating system is called GSE Enterprise Risk, or GSER. It stands for Governance, Solvency, Earnings, and Enterprise Risk, which are market, credit, and operational risk. Unfortunately, there are pervasive weaknesses across the board, which have been getting worse in this market. Over the last 3 years, AFEO and now FHFA have worked hard to encourage the enterprises to rectify their accounting, systems, controls, and risk management issues. They have made good progress in many areas, but the market conditions have really overwhelmed that progress. The result has been that they have been unable to provide needed stability to the market. They also find themselves unable to meet their affordable housing mission. Rather than letting these conditions fester and worsen and put our markets at risk, FHFA, after painstaking review, has decided to take action now. Key events over the past 6 months have demonstrated the increasing challenge faced by the companies in striving to balance that mission and safety and soundness, and the ultimate disruption of that balance that led to, and it's that really the ultimate destruction of that balance that leads to today's announcement. In the first few months of this year, the secondary mortgage market.
All right, we've been listening to the Federal Housing Finance Agency Director James Lockhart, preceded by Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson. So we're going to go right now to the White House.
All right, so a lot of information there. We should have specified before we went into that video just some of the acronyms that you were hearing. At first, when Paulson was up on the stage, he referred to the GSEs a number of times. Now, what GSE stands for is Government-Sponsored Enterprise. And that's how both Fannie and Freddie have been defined for a number of years now, are government-sponsored enterprises, which means they've sort of been walking the line between being a private business and a government-sponsored business. And what second guy who came on, I don't remember his name, he referred to FAO, or FHEO. That stands for the Fair Housing Equal Opportunity, I think it's actually an act, but it's an organization whose job was to oversee the government-sponsored enterprises. What this means is that Freddie and Fannie are backed by taxpayer money, backed by the government, which means taxpayer money, to a certain extent. There were caps and regulations that they had to abide by. So if they were in a certain amount of trouble, they were able to seek government assistance to a certain degree, but only to so much of a degree. Now, this was under the assumption that they were never going to fail so badly. This was, pre-bubble era when all of this was done, and since that time, things have accumulated quite significantly to where we are today, where they're just much larger organizations. And actually, if you've seen Obama or Sarah Palin or McCain talking about this today as well, they've all been emphasizing like these things have just gotten too big, out of hand, especially Palin. She's been saying we need to reduce the size of these organizations. That's out of the hands of any of them as far as I'm concerned, but off topic. So the way that the United States government has been able to change the structure of the funding of these two organizations is by the creation of the FHFA, which is the Federal Housing, what was it?
It's Federal Housing Finance Administration.
Federal Housing Finance Administration. And so I can't even remember it because it was just created like yesterday or something.
Yeah, the guy who's in charge of it couldn't remember it.
He couldn't remember. He said the FHFA. It was just created. And that's what's allowed them now to nationalize these two organizations. They call it conservatize them.
Yeah.
Whereas when they were government-sponsored enterprises, they had that cap, that limit set as to how far they could be bailed out. They now don't have that limit.
Right.
The government can bail them out to a much, much larger extent.
Yeah. And in fact, it's almost at this point less about the government bailing them out, and it's more about the government is now going to be using them as a tool. Mm-hmm. Because up until that point, they could be pushed in a certain direction to act in a certain way to try to help prop up the mortgage market, to help ailing financial institutions, acting almost as if it's a government agency trying to bail others out. But in doing so, they've gotten themselves into some really, really hot water. And so now the Treasury, as a result of a law that was passed in July, H.R. 3221, which essentially created that FHFA, and then commissioned the Treasury Department that if it was necessary to take over Fannie and Freddie. And so in the last month and a half, they did research, went into all of the books, and eventually got to the point where they made this announcement today. And of course, they made this announcement on a Sunday, which the markets are closed. So we're going to see what happens to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mae stock and the markets in general once they realize that the government has gotten to the point where it's nationalized a major, major sector of the American economy.
And the prediction is that it's going to be quite harmful to their
right.
stock.
Because first of all, I think we should, to understand the implications of this, go into the details of what this bailout is, or what this nationalization is. Because it's a nationalization, you think of, Hugo Chavez saying, all right, we own the oil now, and just kicking people out. But here it's done in a much more complicated way, with many more, I don't even know how to put it. Just
attached.
Yeah, more strings attached and more just like little manipulations in the structure. It's a very complex thing. It's not brute, but it's at the same time has a very similar effect.
Same ultimate.
So what the government's doing is it's taking control of 79.9% of the equity of each of these companies, which puts it in gives it a controlling stake. Now that equity comes from the creation of new stock. So anyone who's a shareholder, automatically their stock is diluted by 5 times because the federal government now has 80% of the stock.
That's right. I mean, we saw on Friday the Dow Jones took an enormous hit at the end. I think down 340 points, something like that, because there was the